So I come from a big family. Most of my older siblings lived out their entire childhood without me even existing. So hearing about what our house was like before I can remember is interesting to me. My brother Joe wrote this paper in high school, or maybe college, I don't know, and it's really funny. I asked him if I could make a video of it, and he says he doesn't care, so I'm gonna read it. The Tunnel, by Joe last name. The mind of a 9-year-old is a curious thing. Why do we get in trouble over such trivial accomplishments? I thought, as I was sitting on my parents' bed. This was the absolute worst place to be in the last name household in that period. Back then, it meant that soon your mother or father would enter the room and open a white, squeaky closet door and select a weapon with which to scourge and or cane a seemingly innocent and helpless child. Which will it be, I muttered to myself, the windshield wiper blade, the wooden dowel, or the ever-classic leather belt? It seems pitifully ironic that a large, king-sized bed with fluffy down pillows would be the most uncomfortable place on earth. I couldn't decide on which was the worst part of the punishment. Was it being mercilessly flogged by a homicidal parent, or the prolonged time periods that were spent sweating in anxiety? Even if the beating didn't mark me, I was sure that the psychological turmoil would leave some sort of permanent damage. I thought back to the cause of all this trouble which took place several days earlier. In those days, I was not in possession of any form of entertainment aside from the television, which was closely guarded by my father. My siblings and I were forced to find our own creative means of time wasting, and despite what grown-ups might think, there is a certain number of games you can play with a wooden swing set before you get bored of it. That number is 261. There were some days when my mom would just tell us to go outside and play. On these days, I would spend a lot of time sitting around and pulling up grass, pitching rocks at trees, or throwing our cat Sneakers into the creek behind our house. I even remember one day that we played a game that entailed running into each other as fast as we could. One thing was for certain. Our next-door neighbor, by the name of Mr. Corlett, was an evil, scary man who always watched us from his house. I would constantly see his silhouette in his second-story window just standing there in ominous observation. We never thought we would get the courage to venture onto his property for any reason. However, the image of the unknown and the thirst for backyard excitement overwhelmed us. On this particular day, my 12-year-old sister, Sarah, suggested that we tackle uncharted territory and finally cross the property line threshold for the first time. I was in full favor of the idea, but some of my siblings were not. Fortunately, I could always get my younger brother, Andrew, to go along with our plans, good or bad. It wasn't long before we had snuck over the property line into the realm of Corlett. Our properties were not very spacious, so it was not long before we discovered the afternoon of a lifetime. To an adult, it was a rain drainage pipe, but to a 7, 9, and 12-year-old, it was a dark, moist, 3-foot-wide heaven. As we stood in awe, we heard the sound of our mother's voice loudly informing us that the time for the evening meal had arrived. We were slightly disappointed, but we had a great adventure to look forward to. During supper, we proudly told of our amazing discovery and our plans for our underground excursion. To our dismay, my father immediately said, "Do not go anywhere near that pipe. It's not our property, and it could be dangerous and is completely unnecessary." All of them sounded like valid reasons when they were spoken in the authoritative voice of my father. But we were shocked. Asking a bunch of kids like us not to venture into such a tunnel is like telling an unleashed puppy amidst a yard full of squeaky toys to sit and stay. Broken and hopeless, we went to bed that night thinking of ways we might be able to convince our parents of the importance and the necessity of our journey. Several days passed, and the temptation became too strong. Our curiosity and sense of adventure finally outweighed our reason. We decided that we were going to do the unthinkable. We were going to disobey. This was a bold move for a child with such a strong dad. Sarah and I gathered equipment such as a flashlight, long pants, knee pads, walkie-talkies, and dental floss. The dental floss was invaluable to our mission because it acted as a lifeline for an adolescent explorer such as myself. When it was time to go, I volunteered to go first because I was the oldest boy in the group. Sarah would follow, and Andrew would stay outside to be the watchman. I tied the end of the dental floss to the back of my belt and slid on my knee pads. We barely said anything because the tension was so high. We didn't know what was going to happen or what we would find in the chasm. We finally arrived at the head of the tunnel where we knew there was no turning back. Eventually, each one of us would have given up, but none of us wanted to be the wimp and suggest such an idea. It was this logic that forced us to begin our odyssey. The dental floss quickly ran out, but we pressed on nevertheless. We crawled and crawled for what seemed like hours. Andrew continued to nervously check up with us on the radio. The tunnel was pitch black and smelled of mossy concrete, and our wet hands began to get tired and sore. With each step, we became more and more afraid of getting caught. Our immaturity, pride, and stupidity drove us forward. We would call it strength, courage, and valor just to make ourselves feel better. We were filled with excitement in the knowledge that we were underneath the hill we so often played on. At last we arrived at the large inlet that split off into many more tunnels. Just as we took a moment to rest, a strange, condemned tone in Andrew's voice came over the radio. A tone that said, "Come on out, Mom knows we're in trouble." We knew the fun was over and the hard times had just begun. We made our way out into the piercing sunlight to face our unhappy parents. The words that define the term, worst case scenario, were spoken. "Go in my room," my mom said with a small gesture toward the house. I pieced it all together on the way inside. It was Mr. Corlett who called my parents. I figured he did it because he hated little kids. After the thrashing, I knew for a fact that I would not disobey my parents again for a long, long time. I would always wonder, however, whether or not the fun I had in the stupid tunnel was worth the beating afterward. I still contemplate that question today. Worth it! After Joe finished this report, my sister Emma read it and said, it wasn't Mr. Corlett who told Mom and Dad. It was me. Apparently, they left Emma out of the operation because they knew she'd have to be a little angel and telling them and ruining everything. Hey there, what's poppin', Tom's gang? So I was kind of, dead for a while. Okay, but seriously, as much as I should be, apologizing, I'm so sorry, I didn't upload in so long, and blah, blah, blah. Well, just let me get something straight. The last video I made took 25 pictures to make. This one took 102. So quit your complaining.